sometimes wish I could come up with some son-in-law jokes, actually. They're quite useful at this point. Right, good morning, everybody. Thank you. Morning, Sal. Nice to see you. I don't know if there's anybody here that's looking for a job or is thinking about changing their job. Well, I was looking at some unusual jobs. Not that I'm particularly looking for jobs, I've got plenty, but I was just looking through on the app at some unusual jobs, and there were two that came to mind on these 13 unusual ones. Now, the first one is a golf ball diver. Now, I thought this was good because there's quite a few people here that play golf, and they keep these people employed. Obviously, it's quite a unique job where they have to be trained divers, and they go down, they collect all the balls that the golfers have decided to aim at the water rather than the tee, and have to pick them up. They're retrieved, repackaged, recycled. People like Paul would like the recycling idea. They're recycled, and then sold again, obviously as lake balls. I think they're called lake balls. Is that right? Okay. So that was the first one. The second job, which I really felt suited somebody in this fellowship. They're really, really good at this. And that's a professional cuddler or hugger. And the person I'm thinking of, if you've ever had a cuddle with Sybil, how many people have had a cuddle from Sybil? She does amazing cuddles. If you haven't had one, I suggest you go and have one from Sybil. You don't have to pay her. They are free. All right. So this professional cuddler, it's a job where it's really nice to be cuddled sometimes and loved and showed your love. So well done. And she's also very good at praying. She's a prayer warrior as well. So if you fancy any prayers, she's very good for that. Now my notes are blank, and I've no reason why. Moving on. If I can find the notes. I'm all shakes and fingers here. They've all gone blank. Keith, the printer didn't work. All right. Okay, now we'll get to the talk. All right. This sermon is about a job vacancy, really. That's why I thought about the job vacancy, the unusual jobs. It's quite an unusual job being a queen. It's a vacancy for a queen. This is about Esther. And today we're continuing with our series on Here I Am. And we're going to look at Esther, and we're also going to look at the background and how God worked in that. Now, when I was looking at Esther, I really thought it was important that you knew a bit about the background. It's a huge book. Well, it's not huge, it's 10 chapters. But I couldn't read all 10 chapters for you to get a full picture of it all. So what I thought I'd do, Keith has kindly done me this chart, which I'm going to fill in with a couple of other things as I go along quickly. And then I'm going to look at it with a little bit more spec to it. First of all, in 486 BC, that's when King Xerxes was ruling Persia, and he had 27 provinces, and the capital was Susa. For a little bit of background, this is where this story is set. Now, he decides that he wants to be better than his father, so he has a great banquet. This is a big banquet, 180 days of feasting and fasting. I'd hate to know what the shopping bill for that was, but 180 days of feasting, just enjoying themselves, and that was for his nobles and his generals. Then on top of that, he decides to have another 7 days feasting, but this one is for the common people in the citadel, and the wine was throwing freely, and they could have as much as they liked. And it was during this time that Queen Vashti was asked to come into the throne room dressed in her royal robes, all sparkly and whatever, and she refused. We won't go into the reasons why she refused, but she refused. And the officials decided this wasn't on. Women shouldn't not say they're not going to do something for the king. So she lost her job, basically. So there became a vacancy for a job. And the king had 7 advisors. At the moment, one of them, which is mentioned later on, Haman, is not in that 7. He's not around at all, and that's an important fact. He is not around. Then it goes on that the king wants to invade Greece, and that's why all this banquet's going on. He wants to encourage people to do it, but it fails. We won't go into details, but it fails. So he comes back. He suddenly realises that Queen Vashti's not around, and when we have probably the first beauty contest in history, where unfortunately from all 127 provinces, all the beautiful virgins were taken into the palace. All right? Probably never to come out again either. So they went into the palace. At that time, Esther was taken into the palace. And she eventually makes queen. Once she's made queen, Mordecai, which is her foster, we'll go into that bit, but her foster father at the time, or guardian, sits at the gate of the palace. While he's there, he hears a conspiracy to overthrow the king. And I don't know, we've got that on there actually. He has his conspiracy to overthrow the king, and it's investigated and things. At this time, Haman then comes onto the scene, and he's the one that he's made sort of second in the command, and the king says, people have to treat him like bowing down to him and everything else. Mordecai says, no, I'm not going to do that. Tells Esther, and then all those events, Esther that goes down there, Esther approaches the king. We won't go into all of those now, but it eventually happens that Haman's killed, Esther saves the Jews. All right, so that's a quick review of that. I can't go into much more detail on that for the moment because I'll be picking it up a little bit later. Now, we're going to look at, first of all, the book of Esther. This is what we've been looking at, the book of Esther. And I don't know if many of you know, but it is the only book in the Bible that God's not mentioned. There's no prophecy. There's no words of knowledge. There's no speaking to bushes coming in a light or anything. There is no evidence of God working, or no evidence of God. But there is, if we look at this timeline again in a different way, there is evidence that God is working behind the scenes. All right? I know I rushed over that a little bit, but firstly, the first bit of evidence is that God's working for his people is Queen Vashti is removed from office. All right? She's no longer queen. A decree is made that she is not allowed to come into the king's presence ever again. So she becomes queen. And that's in 483 BC. Secondly, she's replaced in 479, because they had the Greece invasion and things, so there's a gap. When you read it, it sounds like it's straight away, but actually there is a gap. In 479 BC, this Jewish girl, Esther, is crowned queen, and she's placed in a position within the palace. She's actually in a position of authority there. That's the first thing. The second thing, if we look at the timeline, her cousin, or foster father at the time, Mordecai, he cares so much about Esther, he sits outside the gates of the palace every day. He's there every day trying to get news, how she is, how she's coping and all those things, and checking on her. And people get used to seeing him. And while he's there every day, he hears this assassination plot to remove King Xerxes. Now, that plot is overturned. It's looked into, it's overturned, and it's recorded in the king's journals. All right, it's recorded in the king's journal. It's not rewarded, it's just recorded. As I said, Haman comes onto the scene after that. And this is when Mordecai actually refuses to bow down to him, and he decides that he wants to get Mordecai, but also annihilate all the Jews. I've mentioned that earlier. So Mordecai enlists, thirdly, Mordecai enlists Esther's help, Queen Esther's help, to defend the Jews in this event, at the risk of losing her own life. So she goes and she asks Haman and the king to come to a meal. So that day they come. So that was the third thing. The fourth thing, that night, King Xerxes is unable to sleep. So he decides he'll go back and look into his record of all the things that are going on. And he reads about Mordecai. Well, out of all this big, thick book of all the things he's done, that particular bit comes up and he looks at. And he decides that he wants to honour Mordecai. All right? And in honouring Mordecai, he thinks, right, I'll speak to whoever comes into the court, which happens to be Haman that morning. All right? So Haman comes in, he enters the court, because he wants to ask permission to impale Mordecai on a pole that he's erected near his house, because he was fed up with him not bowing down to him, and he wanted just to get that permission. All right? That was the next morning. But the king doesn't give him a chance. He just says, no, I want you to go and honour Mordecai. You take him around, honour him, show him off. Oh, God works well, doesn't he? And so he gets honoured. And then finally, there's this second meal, because she decides to give 2 meals. The second meal, Esther goes to, invites the king and Haman, and she gets a chance to talk to the king about this edict. And Haman, I forgot to say, Haman actually put an edict out, and that meant that to get rid of the Jews and things, it could not be changed, right? An edict from the king meant nothing could actually change it. It was secure in place. So when they're at this meal, Esther shows or tells, please look, I'm going to die here. I'm a Jew. Please can I have my life? Sort of thing. And she reveals it to things. And because Haman didn't know, he gets a bit of a panic. It almost looks like he's begging for his life. The king thinks he's molesting her or whatever, gets angry, and he gets impaled on the pole that he built for Mordecai. It's all sort of, can you see what I'm saying about there's lots of things going on behind the scenes. And then Mordecai is promoted. He becomes second in control. He's given the signet ring and told that he can write an edict to stop everybody else, that the Jews could defend themselves and not, they could defend themselves when the Jews were going to attack them. So he worked for the good of the people in that situation. Now we can see how God was working behind the scenes to bring about what he required for his people. And like Esther was put into that place for such a time as that. But also, so was Mordecai. If you think about it, Mordecai was also there. Now, bringing it to everyday sort of, well, not every day, but when I finished teacher training, I did teacher training down in Chichester, obviously it was time to look for a job. Now, to my surprise, I received a phone call from a head teacher. Now, it was a surprise for different reasons. The first one was I didn't apply for the job. Secondly, the job was in Chertsey, and I'd never even heard of Chertsey. I lived down in Haslemere, and I went to college down Chertsey. I didn't know up here at all right? So I'd never heard of Chertsey. Thirdly, it was in a Roman Catholic school, teaching ages 9 to 13-year-olds, which really wasn't the age I wanted to work with at the time, but you get a job, don't you? Teaching science, PE and dance. I thought, okay, let's go along for the job experience. So I went along, had the interview, and got offered the job. Had a terrible interview, by the way. And got the job there and then in St. Thomas the Apostle School, which is now gone, in Chertsey at the time. At the same time, a friend of mine got a job at the Weybridge food technology place to do a PhD. So we were able to share a flat together, which worked quite well. And Keith, who I'd met in Chichester, had no idea where Esher was, lived in Esher. All right, no idea where he was. And again, I was quite close to the people down in Chichester who invited me back most weekends. So I started to scrounge lists with Keith. So obviously a relationship kind of developed. And we eventually decided to get married. But that is a completely different story. And we decided to look for a place to live up here. We looked in Woking, we looked in Weybridge, we looked in Chertsey. And I, one day, was coming from school. I looked in what used to be a place down the road. And there was a house that came up in Windsor Street. It was... people buying houses. It was £25,000, which was obviously a lot of money in those days as well. And when I told Keith, he says, we can't afford that. That's not the price I said. Got it wrong. That's not the price it was. Anyway, I thought, okay, well, we decided we'd go along to have a look at it. I kind of prayed a bit of a fleece out. Lord, if they offer us a cup of tea, that's the place for us. Anyway, we went in. Before we got our foot in the door, they offered us a cup of tea. We also got the house for slightly less, but it also went down again in price to the price that we could afford. All right. Now, the house in Windsor, which some of you might have visited here, I think there are a few that have visited there, was where we started our first home groups as a church. So the home groups, we started there. Keith was one of the home group leaders when we first started there. Cornelius was a senior leader at the time. And it was also the place where we had our first creche. So if anybody knows Windsor Street, it's number 18. It's the little bit that sort of fills the gap. That's the one where the creche started as well for the church. So a little bit of history there. But what I'm saying is, what I'm telling you this story is, God has used us and brought us to this place now for such a time as this. I would never have thought 40-something odd years ago I would be standing here telling you about my house in Chertsey and what God actually did to get us there. So God uses things and works behind the scenes when we least expect it. So some of you might be thinking, let me think about this, that God is actually working in your lives, believe it or not. Anyway, we've seen how he was working behind the scenes in Esther. But I want to just look at Esther as well and the character she was and the person she was. I'm just going to go through a list very quickly because I know time is short. She belonged to the tribe of Benjamin. Her Hebrew name was Hadash, which was later changed to Ishtar, but the English means Esther, star. It's amazing we're talking about bright things, star. She was exiled in Persia, and they were very, very hostile about God in Persia at this time. Very, very hostile. She was an orphan, and she was fostered by her cousin Mordecai, who really treated her as if she was his own daughter. She had a lovely figure, nice son, and she was very beautiful. She had no choice but to go when they took all those virgins. So she had no choice. There was no choice. This ruler was a cruel, hard person. He was really cruel. She had no choice. She had to go. In going to the palace, she must have experienced some amazing feelings. Fear, well, I think would have been the biggest one I would have felt. Panic, loneliness, insecurity, disappointment, lack of confidence. And also she must have felt a loss for the life she might have had she not been taken. You know, she might have married somebody else, had children of her own. She must have had a loss. But while she's there, she listens, and she's teachable. She listens to Hagar, the king's eunuch, who's in charge of the harem. And she finds favour with everybody she meets. Although it's difficult, she finds favour. And she gives credit to Mordecai. When he tells about the assassination plot, she doesn't keep that for herself. She gives that, she shares that. And to be quite honest, if I'd been in that situation, I don't think I would have been as loyal as she was telling the king. I would have thought, oh, go on then, kill him then, and get out of here, all right? She was loyal. And she had compassion to Mordecai too. When he was in sackcloth outside, you know, wailing about what was going to happen to the Jews, she sent him clothes. She wanted to send him clothes. Now, if we look at this text, the text, please, Chris. No, I've got it here. I can start reading it until it comes up. This is Esther 4:10-14. I'll read this because it's quicker to read it in some ways. Then she instructed him to say to Mordecai, all the king's officials and the people of the royal provinces know that for any man or woman who approaches the king in the inner court without being summoned, the king has but one law, that they be put to death unless the king extends the gold scepter to them and spares their lives. But 30 days have passed since I was called to go to the king. So she's telling Mordecai. When Esther's words were reported to Mordecai, he sent back this answer. Do not think that because you are in the king's house, you alone of all the Jews will escape. For if you remain silent at this time, relief and deliverance for the Jews will arise from another place, but you and your father's family will perish. And who knows but that you have come to your royal position for such a time as this. Then Esther sent this reply to Mordecai. Go, gather together all the Jews who are in Susa and fast for me. Do not eat or drink for 3 days, night or day. I and my attendants will fast as you do. When this is done, I will go to the king, even though it is against the law. And if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went away and carried out all of Esther's instructions. She was courageous, all right? She did not have to choose what Mordecai wanted her to do. She knows that if she remains silent, deliverance for the Jews will come in another way. God cared about his people. He would have brought deliverance another way. Don't know how, but he could have done. But she listens and decides to help. She knew that she would die if the scepter was not being extended. But she was brave enough to go for it. She trusted God and was ready to be used. And she took authority. She tells Mordecai what to do. I think she also showed an amazing amount of wisdom. She didn't rush into sorting out the situation. She prays first and gets them to pray and fast. She had perseverance. For 3 days, it's a long time to pray fast. I had enough trouble for half a day, let alone 3. She received wisdom to know how to deal with the situation. Instead of rushing in, she realised she hadn't been in the king's presence for 30 days. And so she needed to build up that relationship again and get the king's attention and interest. Esther had prepared herself through prayer. She trusted God for the right time to speak. She didn't do it the first time. I think I would have thought, I've got to get this over and done with. I'm going to blurt it all out and get as much out as I possibly can. But she didn't. She kept it to herself. She waited until the second day. And that in itself is amazing because God worked that second day, didn't he? He worked that second day. Do we sometimes rush into things without asking God's help in them? Do we do what we think is right? She was also prepared to speak and wait for whatever the outcome was going to be. Also, she didn't allow her past to stop her from being what she felt she should do. She trusts her destiny lies in God's hands, and for the sake of God's people, she's bold enough to risk her life. She uses authority and knowledge of God to go into the throne room of the king. Do we actually use that authority that God gives us to go into situations sometimes? You know, do we put him first in those situations and go in with that authority, knowing that he's there with us? And how often do we let our past experiences affect us so that we say, no, I can't do that, can't do that. I remember being challenged. I was on a course in, I remember being challenged. I was on a course in Bedford. And we decided we'd go out for a meal afterwards. And what the challenge was that they wanted people to listen for words of knowledge or prophecy for people and to share them outside the church. Panic. Can't do that. Go and talk to somebody outside the church. Oh God, real panic. And especially to share something personal to them. Not an easy thing to do. However, there was a part of me that wanted to obey. All right, I wanted to obey. So we were out at this meal. And that evening, I had a word for one of the waitresses. And I started fidgeting about, should I go for this or not go with this? But then decided, come on, you can do this. So I went and shared this word. And actually, it was really right for this lady. It encouraged her. It made her think about things. She said she might go to King's Arms afterwards. So it was the right thing to do at the time. So I'm not saying that to boast about it. I'm just saying that I walked out in a situation I found difficult. I could think, I can't do that. It's a bit like standing up here. I've said to Keith, I don't know how many times, I can't do that, Keith. I can't do this. Okay. And finally, the other night, I went to the prayer group meeting. And the prayer course, not the prayer group meeting, the prayer course. And we were looking at petitions and how to pray for them. Sometimes when we put our prayers, we expect instant answers. We're an instant society. We expect instant answers. Why can't God do that? But sometimes we need to wait for many years for those petitions to be answered. If you want to know more about how to pray for petition, that course is really, really good. I do recommend, if you get the chance to do it, to go for it. It's really, really good. But one of the things that was said was that it was related to the domino effect. Now, the domino effect is if you have the dominoes going around like this, and then you push one and they all go and all knock down. Well, what they were saying was that when you pray one prayer, it's like putting a domino in place. Then you pray another one and you're putting it in place, and another one, till you get to the point where you've been saturated this whole situation with God's prayer, and then it all comes down, God's breakthrough. And, and it was encouraging to just know that even though some situations we prayed for years haven't happened, haven't come about, just keep going, persevere in it. The Jews must have persevered. They were in Persia. They were, there was no God, no evidence of God, but they must have been praying to somebody. And they were persevering for breakthrough in their situation. And it came years after. I think there are some areas here that you might like to think about praying. If you need a job, might be one, or are looking for a job. If there are things in your background that stop you from going forward, stop you from doing things. I mean, I could have told you all about my background. There's not good things in it, there's bad things in it sometimes, but if I'd have gone into that, I didn't want to centre on me, I wanted to centre on what Jesus can do for us. All right, so if there's anything that's stopping you saying, here I am, it might be good for you to have prayer for that as well. And if you're one of those people that have been praying for a long time for things, think about that cause. Think about persevering. And I just want to encourage you to keep going, really. And I'm going to hand over to Dave now, and I can take a sigh of relief. Dave.